Good afternoon. My name is Mark Hardy. I'm the Director of Nonprofit Executive Programs in the Nonprofit Professional Development at Mendoza College of Business. And I'd like to welcome the faculty, staff, and students, University of Notre Dame, and those of you who are here from the Michiana community, welcome. I think you're going to have a great program after spending an hour and a half with Mark and having him interact with people. Really interesting person, and I think you're going to really enjoy his message. This is the fourth year of the Greater Good series, and that is co-sponsored by the Master of Nonprofit Administration program and the Master of Business Administration program at the Mendoza College of Business here at the University of Notre Dame. And I especially want to thank a couple of people who do a lot of behind-the-scenes work, but never get out here to get any recognition. And one is Cindy Prophet, and I just saw her. Did she escape? There she is. Okay, you moved on me. Yeah, Cindy Prophet. She's with the MBA program. And from our department, Kim Brennan, who has done also a lot of work on this from the Master of Nonprofit Administration. And all of their people that help them. There's a cast of thousands behind them, I know. The mission of the series is to educate and impart knowledge about the nonprofit sector, trends in the sector, talk about the people who work in the sector and how they got to where they are today. Now, the attendance of this has grown every year. We had it at the Hesburgh Center last year, and it was packed. And it was a smaller venue, so we moved it to here, and I'm glad to see there's probably 100 or more people here today. And so we wanted to accommodate more participants, and we truly do consider you participants, not just audience members, because as you can see, there are 2 microphones down here for you to ask questions. And we want you to ask questions, especially the students that are here today, because this is an excellent opportunity to have those burning questions answered about what am I going to do with the rest of my life. Even at my age, I still ask that question. But you have a real opportunity, because some of the things he's going to talk about today, I wish I had known when I was in college. I think I could have saved myself a lot of time and heartbreak. So he's got a lot of great stories and a very interesting journey. Look, a couple housekeeping items. First of all, after Dr. Albion finishes, there will be a question and answer session. Second of all, please turn off your cell phones or pagers. And here's the reason. Because at about 1:40 today, right in the middle of his presentation, there's going to be an alert sent out from Notre Dame. And we really don't want 100 cell phones going off, okay? So if you could put it on silent, put it on cell phone. Please don't put it on vibrate, because 100 cell phones vibrating still is a heck of a noise. So please do that so that we're not interrupted. After the question and answer session, please remain seated. Dr. Albion is going to move out into the lobby, and he has books out there, and he will do some book signings. And then we're going to conduct a survey via email for those who have attended the event. We really take these surveys seriously because we want to improve every single year. And I think because of the way the attendance has grown, we have done that in a pretty convincing manner, and we want to continue growing this tradition. So now I'm going to introduce the person who is going to introduce Dr. Albion. Her name is Mary Claire Sullivan, and when I met Mary, it struck me, I realized I knew her from somewhere. When I read her resume, I realized where it was, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. She is soon to be a double domer. That means she's going to have 2 degrees from the University of Notre Dame. One, a bachelor's in business administration and finance, and she is a candidate now with an entrepreneurship concentration in the Master of Business Administration. She has worked for Community Enterprise Solutions in Guatemala and Nicaragua for 2 years, and she's proficient in Spanish. She was Net Impact President in 2011. You'll hear more about Net Impact today. And she was Value Committee Chair, Co-President in 2010-2011. She's the 2010 Clinton Global Initiative University Discussion Facilitator, the 2000, and here's what I realized where we had met each other. She also ran the 2007 Chicago Marathon. And why do you think that's so funny, you know? So with that, please help me welcome Mary Claire Sullivan.
Well, I didn't know I was going to get an introduction as well, so feeling pretty special today. Good afternoon to all, and thank you for joining us. As just indicated, my name is Mary Claire Sullivan. I'm a first-year MBA student and the current president of the MBA Net Impact Club. As such, it is an incredible privilege to introduce today's speaker, one of the co-founders of Net Impact, Dr. Mark Albion. To say Dr. Albion has done it all wouldn't be too far from the truth. After traveling the world for 15 months as a young adult, Dr. Albion returned to school, earned his PhD, and became a professor at the Harvard Business School. Dr. also spent a number of years working in the corporate world and has started a few small businesses of his own. He's authored 7 books, a few of which have been bestsellers. And finally, of most importance, Dr. Albion is a husband to his wife Joy and a father to their daughters Amanda and Nicolette. Dr. Albion's diversified past has led him to the great fortune of making a living by living his passions of writing, speaking, and challenging young people like us to lead business lives of service. And just in case Dr. Albion's passions for his life's work is not evident enough in the forthcoming speech, Dr. Albion spent the last 3 days in airports, arrived here yesterday in the dead of winter without the convenience of luggage. So if that does not show commitment, I'm not quite sure what does. So on behalf of the administration, faculty, staff, and students of Notre Dame, Doctor, we welcome you and thank you for coming. With that, let us give a warm Notre Dame welcome to Dr. Mark Albion.
Hey, can you hear me pretty well? Am I on? How about up there in the expensive seats? Can you guys hear me? Great, great. Skydeckers are important too. Special seats. In Boston, we get the Green Monster. Hey, it's great to be here. This is my 5th time here. Thank you for the great introduction, Mary Claire. I want to thank you, Mark, and certainly Kim, and particularly Cindy Prophet, who we've spent a lot of time together while I've been here and helping me get here in many ways. And just, it's an honor to be here. This is, I think, my 5th or 6th time in the last 10 years. I've been here for a week at a time as a sort of a professor for a week and a bunch of different things, and it's just really a treat to come out to Notre Dame. One of the things that hit me the first time I came out is I asked, is it possible for me to maybe spend 5 minutes and talk to Father Hesburgh? He's so famous, arguably the most well-known college president in the United States, and I'm sure there's all these different people I have to go through, but is it possible? And the person brought me over and said, well, just call him up. And of course, just call him up and dropped right in, spent about 20, 30 minutes talking to him. And I mentioned that because it really set a tone for me in my relationship with Notre Dame, which, you can see here, and at home I've got at least 5 shirts, and living in Boston, of course, I was saying, a lot of people don't realize this, we actually get Notre Dame football games every week. Until Boston College got pretty good, but in the Doug Flutie era, Notre Dame was and still is for many people the main college. So we have a pretty close connection with the school. And certainly for me, that first introduction to this really very special school with Father Hesburgh was great. The second connection I've had is over the years, working in this field through Net Impact, the UN, other ways, I've gotten to know a bit of your dean, Dean Wu, who's arguably one of the 3 or 4, if not number 1, deans most focused on business ethics, on careers with a social impact, on making a difference. And she has been a tremendous proponent over, I think it's her 3rd term now as dean, of what we believe in a net impact, and certainly what my life is about, which is about a life where we use business and use our life force to help uplift the human spirit and to try to help alleviate some of the poverty and suffering we have on our planet. And so again, it's a real honor to be here. Okay, in terms of getting started, I think I want to sort of break the presentation up into sort of three sections for you, so bear with me. And we'll have a movie. Anybody bring popcorn, by the way? Popcorn? By the way, how many of you are students? Just to get an idea, pretty much mostly grads. How many of you are college students? Probably, oh, good mix. And how many of you are not students? Up here, okay, great. Okay, great. Okay, so it's a student crowd, wonderful. I'm here for questions. I think we're going to do the Q&A, Mark and I said pretty much after, but as I'm going through, this is going to be relatively rapid. I'm going to be combining sort of 2 books and 2 lectures to try to address 2 fundamental questions for you. But first, what I want to do is set a sort of philosophical overtone, a bit of a spiritual overtone, which all of my work has to do with, and certainly Net Impact is very deeply based on spiritual values in terms of a life of service to others, and in ways serving yourself. So I want to sort of set a tone for that, and I'll set it personally, and then go through sort of 2 pieces of that. The first piece comes from a book called True to Yourself. It's a leadership book where we looked at what really makes a special leader, a leader of service, and I'll try to define that for you. And we came up with 3 characteristics, which I'll talk about through a couple of stories. Those characteristics are defined very differently than the words are normally defined, and they were competence, compassion, and commitment. I like to do this up front, so if you go for a little walkabout in the middle, you'll still be okay. All right? So those are the 3 main words I want you to think about and how you can apply those to your own career of being a leader for the greater good. The second part is then saying, okay, if that's where I want to get to, how do I get there? And that's the most recent book that I wrote called More Than Money, a follow-up to Making a Life, Making a Living. That's a book that says, great, I want to bring my passion into my profession. I want to serve, but I also want to be able to make a living too. I want to have a good full life, which incorporates many things beyond just my specific career or specifically how I earn an income. How do I do that? So we wrote a book, and I say we because it's really was done over 10 years, I've been to about 600 universities over the last 30 years, talking to a lot of you and hearing what your concerns are. So your voices really came in to go through a set of questions in a way of developing what we call your destiny plan. It can be an elevator pitch and then a plan for how you want to approach your career, your life in the world at large. How you're going to add value to others and how you're going to in that way serve yourself. Okay? So that will really be that section, and there'll be a movie in that section, so I'll have to bring the popcorn next time. It's in Boston with my luggage. All right, so let's get started. As you see on the opening slide, again, this is sort of a philosophical backdrop, and I think it's important because the consciousness we bring to any subject, to our careers, the first question that we ask makes a huge, huge, huge difference. So I have up here, and I'm going to explain what this is later. I was actually going to bring a physical representation of this scene of some children playing on a playground. It's called a play pump, but I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in a leader that's really wonderful about this. But I want to take a backdrop to all of this and think about a big question. I grew up in a family, by the way, of physicists, which was really weird. I was sort of in a Bible and religion and ethics, and my family were all physicists. But the one thing we did like to talk about was Albert Einstein. And it wasn't really about his work. I couldn't understand most of his work. My father apparently had some classes with him, said it was easy to follow him for a while, and then all of a sudden you were lost. You just couldn't understand where he was. But we used to discuss his philosophy, and Einstein once said that when he was a young man, he was asked the question of if he could ask God one question, what question would he ask God? All right, if he had a telephone line to the Lord, what would he ask God? And he said, I would ask God how the universe began, because once I knew that, the rest is equations. Easy for me to figure out, no problem. Right? Get out that little slide rule, right? My father's slide rule. Anyway, my Bible, his slide rule. Anyway, as he got older, Einstein changed his question. He said, I wouldn't ask God how the universe began. I'd ask God why the universe began, because I'd be asking God, what is the meaning of my life? What am I here for? Why am I here? By the way, that's the tentative title of the book I'm writing right now. That's give me a little practice on the next book. Why am I here? What am I doing here? And that question always really hit me. I'm sure it has you, because all of us dream of noble purposes. All of us want to make a difference. Everybody does, no matter what their conditions around the world. I used to do a newsletter every month for 163 months, and that newsletter went to 87 countries, and it didn't matter where people came from. Everybody has a dream, and everybody has a dream of making a difference. What does that have to do with leadership? What does that have to do with how we approach our lives? So for me, this sort of moment that, just to give you a little personal background, where it really hit me, was it hit me starting on a date, June 6, 1986. Actually, this was the day that I was going out to buy my first trophy purchase. It was a brand new black Jaguar car, all the bells and whistles. At the time, I was a professor at Harvard Business School. I was making quite a bit of money. I was pretty well known, blah, 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 blah. I won't bore you with the details, and I was tremendously in love with Mark Albion. I just thought he was the greatest guy. As I'm going out the door, it was a rainy day, I'll never forget it, with my wife to pick up this trophy purchase. She paid cash for no problem. It was just one check from one of 5 companies that I had little pieces of. It was a monthly check. The phone rang, and that was my telephone call from hell. It was a call from my mom. It was very close to my mother. My mother was one of the original socially responsible business people without all those fancy terms. She ran a small textile firm where she had people come in from other countries. They taught them English. They helped them buy homes. They gave them second jobs. They used to set up some knitting looms in women's houses so they could do some of the loom work at home, because you can't bring kids into a factory. And it was a call from her saying, "I'm coming home. I need to talk to you now." Now, at that point in my life, my mother, I talked to her every day. She was on a business trip. My mother never came home early from a business trip. It was actually from Chicago, near here. And we decided we'd see her 4:30 in the afternoon, and my wife and I went out to get the car, and I barely remember anything, blah, 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 because I knew there was just something wrong. My mother came in at 4:30 that afternoon and basically told us that she had cancer, stage 4 cancer, and it was pretty bad. And it really shook me. It was like, what? And of course, being a guy, I said, well, I got to call the doctor and fix this. This can be fixed. What? I called the doctor, and he said it's worse than she knows. She's got about 6 weeks to live. God damn. So it really hit me. And so obviously we changed things. Mom had an operation. Believe it or not, that March, that was June. In March, she was still alive. Longer than the 6 weeks they had predicted. Harvard had been great to me, tremendous about making my schedule easier, teaching, no teaching, nothing. I couldn't ask for more. They're just absolutely wonderful. And we visited with Mom pretty much every day, and she seemed to be doing pretty well. And then in March, she went back in for an exploratory to try to find out if she's still alive. And I remember the doctor calling and saying, she's clean. She's microscopically clean. We have no idea why. My mother still today at 83 is running that business. So a really nice ending, but it was a real shock for me. I mean, that never had happened to me. Probably many of you here have had those type of things happen in your family, friends, or maybe to yourselves as well. And they're really, quite a wake-up call of what am I doing here? Because I thought about my mother, who we found out later on when we weren't seeing her, my wife and I, she was having one of her coworkers sneak her into her factory down in southern Massachusetts, where she could not sit in the chair that you're sitting in. She had to lie on the floor. But she had to be there for her people to make sure they had work, that things were going well, they're being taken care of, making sure. She just had to be there for them. She cared so much about being there. And my sort of joke at the time is, gee, if I was that condition, would I go into my business school classroom, lie down the floor and teach? No, I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. But my point was, and this is no disrespect to my school, which has been a tremendous platform and was a tremendous employer for me for nearly 20 years and all that, but her connection with her work, her passion into her profession, her ability to have so much impact through a very small company with the workers, and I can get on to what she did in the community at large and the AIDS community, a whole bunch of social causes, was just phenomenal. And she was so connected to that even in that state, she knew why she was here. And I didn't yet. So that was really my search. And my search, I left Harvard Business School, was really the main part of founding, and have been involved since 1989 with Net Impact in a variety of capacities, but trying to find a way, taking that journey that we all take to try to be able to make a life and a living, to really be able to try to bring my passion into my work, and to do it in a way that I can also make a living, and also, in my case, balance that with having a family life of Amanda Nicolette and my wife Joy of 30 years. That's a whole nother discussion, which I'm happy to have questions on, an ongoing challenge for all of us with 2 career families and raising children. So the reason I bring this into a leadership discussion is this is a fundamental question of leadership. Why are we here? Why are people spending 40 hours, 50 hours a week working with you? Now, we know there's the making a living part, but it's going to be more than that. And as a leader, part of what we need to do is first answer for ourselves, which I'll get into in the second part of the presentation, and answer for others why we're here. What's the purpose of what we're doing? You're going to spend, I said earlier today, about 100,000 hours working. Now, 10,000 hours of that you'll be rebooting Windows. The other 90,000 hours, shouldn't they be fun? Shouldn't they be something special? Shouldn't you feel really good about what you're doing? And everybody deserves that. Every single person. I have the honor right now. We'll see how it's goes so far. We just started working with the AFL-CIO on 11.5 million people on how do we help them upgrade to get meaningful work in terms of what's going on now with unions, in terms of the work in Detroit and in Buffalo and different things like that. Everybody wants me. How do we get there and how do we develop those sort of qualities? And when you think of a leader for the greater good, whom do you think of? I'll just answer for us. Like one of the people we always come up with, I mentioned this morning, is Nelson Mandela. Great example of someone who's a leader. What are the qualities he embodies? What's Nelson Mandela about? His grandson and heir, if you will, as you may know, all his sons have passed away. His grandson, Dumani Mandela, is in his early 40s, and at one point was asked about his grandfather, why is it that Mr. Mandela, I like to say like George Washington, well, he's a great man and did a lot of great things for South Africa. He became president and actually was a very ineffective president. Wasn't really a very good president. But you know what? Nobody criticized him. I mean, little sniping here or there, it's politics. But in general, nobody criticized him. And Dumani said to the reporter, he said, well, you know, when a leader's MO, when their objective, their goals are so clear that all they really care about is serving you, how can you criticize them? Never forgot that. Really hit me. I heard that from Dumani. So if that's a model, one of the things I talk about, and again, so much of this comes from my work with others, is that leadership, and as you develop yourselves in your life, leading your life as well as the work that you do, it's really about an act of liberation, not control. It's a very hard transition to make. It's not about controlling things. It's about liberating others, and as you liberate others, how you liberate yourselves. This beautiful quote, one of my favorite, I love quotes, use them all the time in my writings, and this one's from Lil Watson, that, you know, if you are coming to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you're coming because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Service is a two-way street. We all know that. All of us, probably everybody here has done service work, at least if not quite a bit of their lives. It's a real Notre Dame tradition, and Notre Dame attracts people who care deeply about service. Liberation. So when you begin to think about your career and developing it, how can you become a facilitator, a liberator? That's what's going to really lead you into being a leader for the greater good. A liberator, not in control. By the way, easy to say, sitting here Friday on the stool in front of a wonderful crowd here, but it's really hard to do. Most of us who have been involved in business know that we're control freaks, most of us. Controlling everything, making sure everything's being done. I like to say management is what happens when you're there. Leadership is what happens when you're not there. How do you facilitate? How do you facilitate personal transformation in an organization with a set of values and work with a set of values that liberates people to grow themselves and to become and be able to dream and fulfill the dreams they want to fulfill? So the book we wrote to try to get at this is a book called True to Yourself. Came out about 5 years ago. Social Venture Network is my group. It's really the group that is the godfather, godmother of Net Impact. That's really what Net Impact came out of. A bunch of us started talking about what to do in business schools in the 80s, and some started business schools, and I and a couple others got involved in starting Net Impact. And the question we had is that about 1/3 of us are nonprofit executives and about 2/3 are for-profit. There wasn't really much of a distinction. The issue was, what do we really need to do to step up as leaders in our organization and in our lives? Because the problem we have at Social Venture Network is most of our small companies have been sold off to large companies. We found that it wasn't because of finances, it was because we just didn't know how to get to the next level of moving from entrepreneurs and self-starters to people who could really grow people and be able to grow organizations. So the question was, what are the characteristics we need to develop to really be leaders for the greater good? And there were 3 that I already mentioned to you we came up with. And what I want to do to illustrate them, and this was also sort of the general definition that our group came up with. There were about 75 people that I interviewed, many of whom you're having here to speak, like Jeffrey Hollander and Jay Cohen Gilbert. That these people, when they think about how they lead, they think about their decision-making in terms of how it impacts people and the planet, all living things. Horst Rechelbacher, a friend of ours, used to run a company called Aveda. When people would say, how do I make decisions? He'd say, the number one decision is, how does it, the number one criterion, how does it affect the planet? How does it affect the planet? These are beginning to shift consciousness of saying that a business isn't here just to maximize profits for its shareholders. It's about stakeholders. It's about a wider range of holistic concerns. That's great to say, but then how do you operationalize it every day in what you do? It's really, really hard. It's very hard. We all love win, 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 wins, but it's usually trade-off, 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 at least in the short run, okay? So these people really were integrating the discussion, the conversation, as they made daily decisions in the workplace around this. So I want to give you an example, and this goes back to our first slide, of one of these leaders. His name is Joe Mugabe. You don't see a picture of him because his name's not Joe Mugabe. He's a very humble man. He doesn't really want his name being thrust around, so it's a bit of a combination. And this is one of the things that Joe has supported. This is called a play pump. I don't know how many of you know play pumps, but I mostly want to talk about the kids in a minute. But these play pumps, these were started by Trevor Fields about 10 years ago out of South Africa. They're basically little merry-go-rounds that kids play on. They cost about $14,000 to set up. It bores down by centrifugal force into the ground and brings up about 2,500 liters of portable water every day, which will take care of 2,500 people. Huge advancement in most of southern Africa now. It's paid for, you can't see it there, but those are billboards around the top. And while they first start off there's 4 of them being supported by companies about their company, they end up talking about AIDS and about clean hands and about healthy living, things like that. Wonderful social entrepreneurial invention, which Joe is one of the supporters of. But let me tell you about Joe Mugabe himself, because he's just such a beautiful case, I think, of these 3 qualities of competence, commitment, and compassion. The way I got to meet Joe, Joe is his first name, the way I got to meet Joe was I spent a week at Gibbs, which is a business school in South Africa. I was in South Africa for a few weeks setting up some net impact chapters. In Gibbs, the Gordon Institute of Business Science sponsored me for about a week. And one of the things they do in their business school there in Johannesburg is once a month they take students out, about 30 at a time, on a field trip to go visit a local entrepreneur and try to help him or her with their business. You know, sort of like a field consulting experiment. So this day we were going out to visit Joe Mugabe in his hotel and restaurant, which is about 2.5 hours outside of Johannesburg, north of Johannesburg. And we got in the bus and we start, it's really interesting. The minute you leave the city, things start going brown. Brown being, more connected with poverty and not a lot of resources, not a lot of water. And then we get to the base of the town that he lives in. And we passed the school. In fact, there was a play pump. There was one of these little play pumps out there. And the school was gorgeous. It was like a K through 12 elementary, junior high school, maybe high school. Kids were out there playing in really nice uniforms. The school was newly painted, renovated. Really beautiful place. I went, wow, this is very cool. So we went up the little dirt road and finally arrived at Joe's Hotel and Restaurant. And I don't know how many of you, probably very few of you, maybe down here, have ever seen the movie Psycho, the original Psycho movie in 1960. But if you've ever seen it, in there's the Bates Motel. I mean, it's not a great looking place. It's pretty scary, okay? Really down and trodden. Well, the Bates Motel was sort of like the Ritz or the Four Seasons compared to what Joe's Hotel and Restaurant looked like when we got there. It was pretty shabby. And all our students are right away, they're scribbling notes. How we can help Joe. All right. So anyways, we go into the lobby, and we sit down in the lobby to wait for Joe. And actually, one of the chairs a student was sitting on broke. Fell to the floor, but he was okay. And we wait for Joe to come out, looking around, and students are taking notes. And Joe finally comes out. He's maybe 5'7", quiet man. Sits down. There's sort of a stillness in the air, and says hello to everybody and sort of waits for a question. So finally, one of the students says, well, what's your turnover? What's your revenue for the place? And he says, about 100,000. The student says, wow, 100,000 rand per year. That's probably pretty good. Rand, as you know, is South African currency. Today it's about 7 to 1 with the dollar. Then it was about 6 to 1. So, $100,000 a year back then. And, rand, that's what, 16, 17,000. That's not bad for a really little place, And Joe says, no, excuse me, no, I'm sorry, 100,000 a month, U.S. Notes, 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 notes. Hear a buzzing, right? Whoa, so everybody's a little bit stunned, you know. Then the student says, well, what's your profit margin? Profit margin, yeah, well, what do you clear? Like what percentage of, this do you clear? He says, well, about 70%. Oh, notes, notes, notes. And now I hear a buzzing, the students in the background, like, what's he doing with all the money? He's certainly not putting it into this place. It's falling apart. Does he have like a paramour somewhere, or does he have a boat down in Cape Town, or what's he doing with all his money? So then pregnant pause in that final question. Gee, Joe, what are you doing with all the money, Mr. Mugabe? Answer? Yeah. The school, the play pumps. Joe's part of a philosophy which you may or may not have heard of. One American President, Bill Clinton, mentioned. It's called Ubuntu. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and I think if there's anything you can remember out of today, if there's one word you want to think about and focus on and how you look at business, in the More Than Money book, not that I'm trying to sell it, has a section on it. It's the social philosophy of Ubuntu. It's the philosophy from South Africa. I think it's their greatest gift. It's certainly one of them. That basically says, and that's in Zulu, it's called Ubuntu, one of their 14 languages, I am because you are. I become a person through you. If in Ubuntu culture, you say to me, how did you sleep last night? I say, I slept well if you slept well. Your personhood, your definition, your identity comes through the community. If you want to visit Mr. Nelson Mandela, you better know Kunu, you better know Transkei. Those are the province and the town he's from. You don't go to visit Mr. Nelson Mandela. You go to visit his communities. That's where the honor is. And as the community, as your job is to support with your gifts, the community, as I like to say that, what God has done is God has given you your gifts and your gift back to God. Your gift from God is who you are, and your gift back to God is who you become. In your becoming, the way you become in a Ubuntu society is the community's job is to find out how best to use your gifts. So it's a very synergistic relationship. There are universities built on the Ubuntu philosophy, CIDA, C-I-D-A, being by far the most well-known, and it's all over South Africa. After this, by the way, I can get back to Ubuntu. I'm happy to talk more about it. But just the community philosophy. And as I say, what's really special about it to me, having spent months now going down to South Africa and other parts of Southern Africa, is the notion it's not just about you in terms of the community, but how the community helps you find your gifts. One of our problems in schools is we've seen this single track everybody. But here you have communities that say, oh, you're good at cooking? Great, you're going to be the cook. The schools, you go do all your research back in your village with your elders, learning about your history and how that can be of value to society. It's just, and again, the basic fundamental value is we're here to serve others, just like Notre Dame. And that is really foundationally how you build your life. After that, Joe, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. Joe took us back to his back room, and he had plans that he had drawn for technical school, so that after the children graduated from this junior high school, elementary school that he had built with the proceeds from the hotel, they now were going to build this technical school so the students could get technical training, get jobs in Johannesburg, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, again, on the interest of time, I won't go through it. I've written a whole case on this, but just the way that whole hotel operates. I mean, the customers that come there oftentimes clean their own rooms, help work in the restaurant. It's a community. Everybody's part of it. People pay more than they have to pay, or whatever they can pay. Everybody does lots of different jobs, including Joe, and of course that's the key here. So in terms of what we learn out of this, these are the three characteristics that I write about. There's an article, if you read the Stanford Social Innovation Review, in the fall edition I have an article called, I think it's called Leadership. It's about being more of a monk, architect, and diplomat. Those are cute, sexy names for these three qualities. And I ask you to sort of think about them. Go look at that article if you like. It's about, you can read it in 15 minutes. But it really, really focuses on defining these three terms differently than we traditionally define them, particularly in business and leadership and in life. For example, competence. Competence is not about knowing everything or doing everything. Joe doesn't know or do everything. Joe serves, just like Father Hesburgh did, I'm sure he did much more, as an exemplar, as an example. In fact, Genesis 12:2, when Abraham is first being called and said, you've got to go out and start this great nation and do all this stuff, his first words to God in terms of, how can I do this? What should I do? I'm not somebody who can start a nation. God's words are v'vei bracha, which basically in English say, you just be an example. You be an exemplar. Gandhi's words. We have these in all the religions. You be an example of the values that you want to see your institution, your organization, your nation, your family exhibit. And that Joe's a perfect example of that. Remember, as a leader, everything you say and you don't say, everything you do and don't do, everybody watches. We learn as parents, and there's more research out on the impact of peers as opposed to parents, but as parents, our kids watch everything that we do and everything that goes out there. In fact, I was giving a speech at a conference one day, and I asked the group, that I had 2 minutes to speak to my daughter at the time before she had her bat mitzvah, and what should I say? And one of the younger people said, it doesn't matter what you say, she won't listen to a word out of your mouth, but she'll watch everything that you do. So we talk about leadership for the greater good, competence. We're talking about the example that you set. We're not talking about that you know how to do everything in the business. In fact, if you do, that squeezes everybody else out. Your job isn't to know everything, it's to help everybody else be successful and know things. Again, a very tough transition of going from control, what I do, to an act of liberation, of liberating others to be able to fulfill their gifts and to reach their dreams. While it may take your passion to get yourself started in your career, if you want to be able to have the impact most of us want to have, however you define that, it's going to take your ability to engage others in their passions and their dreams to really most effectively be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. That's the way we look at competence. In the book, we go through quite a bit of detail, in looking at that. The second one, commitment. Commitment is a commitment to the organization, in particular the people. As much as competence is about values, commitment is about human beings. Many of our best leaders for greater good don't look at sales growth that much. They don't look at product. They look at the growth of their people. They're there to help facilitate personal transformation in others and themselves. In fact, one of the comments of a nonprofit leader, wonderful guy who ran for 15 years, Greyston Bakery in Harlem, which brings in people with AIDS and a lot of homeless people to both gives them work in the bakery. They have living quarters, they have daycare, et cetera. It's been about 50% of the people it works with. Julius once said, here, what we do is we really support people. We help them transform. When we support them, they support the products, and that supports the revenue and the whole process. Okay, but being able to focus your commitment on your organization, your people, is really tough. J. Cohen Gilbert, who was here on January 21st, said to me when we were talking about it, he said, that's what we made a mistake in my company. We forgot about all those things you don't count. We forgot about process. We forgot about people. We got so excited with our company growing and so arrogant about it. We were out selling and talking to the world. We forgot about that. Everything we have is based on the culture and the people and making sure they have what they need to be successful in the work they're doing and helping them to reach their dreams. So the commitment, as much as we like the cause, the true commitment of these people is to the organizational itself. As one of my friends said, who grew a company called Odwalla, a drink company, as Greg said to me, he said, a captain doesn't run the ship. It's really the designer, the architect. So part of your job as a leader for greater good is facilitating the liberation of a structure of a way that you deal with, whether it's your family or a 5-person unit, a structure that works best for you in accomplishing the goals you're trying to accomplish and helps individuals grow. Again, how Joe does that is very simply not only his humility, he's a wonderful listener, not a big talker, but he's there involved in all aspects of the small hotel, still doing every single job and helping people with every single job, as well as you can imagine how deeply involved he is with the local community and many people's families. You can imagine if you're going to that area, nobody's allowed to stay at any other hotel. There aren't that many left in the area. Everybody goes to Joe's. Finally, compassion. The compassion is the compassion, we say, of a diplomat, not a dictator, but a compassion, by that I mean is also all of these leaders for the greater good look beyond their own company. They go beyond the 4 walls of their own department or their own organization and look at their impact in the industry and the world at large in different ways. It varies. In Joe's way, it's the community in his town. For other people, I'm not going to go through Anita Roddick when she was running the body shop. It was about human rights around the world. But every one of them looks beyond their own borders. In a very practical way, one of my friends ran a company that was a very, very large producer of point-of-sale merchandise, mostly for clothing lines. Whoops, something just fell. Oh, okay. Thank God it wasn't part of me. At this age, you don't know. Oh my God, what just fell off? Hopefully I didn't know, it's fine. And in fact, Carol realized, because they were such a large, she had a $5 billion company she was running, $5 billion, that her impact on distributors was enormous because it was so seasonal and would really have a big effect upon the people working in that distributorship on their workloads and on hiring. She used to every quarter visit every major distributor and go over research to help them predict what workload would come in from her to help them run their business better and help not put so much stress and pressure on their people. For a distributor. Compassion, going beyond the borders of your own company, your own family, your own organization, to see how you impact the world at large. Okay. Great. I'm going to skip Anita. That's just the time. Another expression we came up with, I got the privilege last year of doing a year of speaking. I did 4 speeches for the president. And the focus was on helping companies get more involved, large companies continue being involved in volunteering and particularly in service. And the theme we used for the 4 years is that to be a great company and to be a great leader is not just about being best in the world, but it's about being best for the world as well. And I think that's really part of this, the whole ethics and ethos and consciousness of these leaders. Comment from one of the last ones who's developed actually our largest environmental conferences in the world, Pioneers, is that the way these leaders really look at these qualities is they come together in this way, that each of us has a spark of divinity within us, and it's our greatest aspiration to try to set up that spark in one another. It's a very different way of operating that I think most of us operate when we think about our careers and how we're going to move along in our careers and leaders. Okay, that's the sort of what. Given limited time, I'm going to move through the how. More Than Money League, by the way, for those of you interested, I can talk about it later, we do online courses. We're in the pilot stage. The next one is February 21st, to help you work through all of this for yourself. And how can you become, and this is the one really done for MBAs, are the people that take these courses are between the ages of 26 and 63. They're online. We try to limit them to 40 people, and people get individual attention. And we're trying to work with career officers. Cindy's not there right now. She's one of them. Through Net Impact, we've started to develop a set of career officers around the country that are all trying to focus on helping you be in position to obtain jobs with social impact where you also can make a living. I'm going to skip. You already know enough about me, okay? Do you like the picture, though? Is the picture pretty cute? You know, a guy with like a big mouth, stubby little body. Next to my daughter gave me a lot of hair, though. Any kid, if anybody gives you a lot of hair, they can say anything else about me. Not a problem. The point of this was, Nicolette drew this when she was 8. This is probably 12 years ago, and it was when I'm constantly struggling myself on who am I and what do I do, and it's always been a sort of a bit of a joke in the family and among friends, what is Mark doing now? But Nicolette really nailed it when she said, oh, Daddy, he loves to be at his pewter. She used to call my computer pewter. Daddy, he loves to type. That's what Daddy loves to do. He loves to type. And it really made me reconnect without going through the whole story with how much I love to write. It's something that I'd given up for years. I found some old stories in an attic that I had written when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, sold them door to door for 3 cents and 5 cents, and sort of dropped that because how can you make money as a writer, right? And then later on in my later part of my life, in my 40s, picked that up again and realized it's really, I love to come to schools. I love to be at a place like Notre Dame. But my, my true love, my favorite day is really, I love to have an opportunity just to write and try to get my voice out there. So it took my 8-year-old to make me remember that. The point of the More Than Money League and of the book is really to help you develop a path to personal fulfillment. Your own destiny plan is what we call it. Many books do this. This one is just much more focused, completely focused really on MBAs, but it's really good for any conflicted achievers. Conflicted achievers, I'm a great example. I went out, got a good job, made good money, good status, and then sort of hit the wall, said, there's got to be more to life than this. The other people we have in our group in Net Impact and others is what we call them passionate strivers. Those are people who tend to go more in the nonprofit world. They're very passionate about what they do, et cetera, but they get burnt out. They get tired of little pay, of ineffective management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is say, how do you become a passionate achiever? Again, you can use any terms that you like. So this is just for me. And it's the end of a lot of work. The book has about 64 questions, but the 4 main questions we try to take you through are these 4. And I think I want to make one critical point for you, just like with the competence, commitment, and compassion. The problem is that most of us start at the third question. What can you do? Where are you going? Very few of us spend any amount of time about who are you and what do you want. Very critical. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What are those passions you had when you were 10, 11, 12? How do you bring those into your profession? What do you want? What does success mean to you? Everybody else will tell you what success is. It's very tough to go to great schools like Mendoza, where there's so much pressure on you to, compete in certain ways, to get certain jobs. We've all been through it. We know what MBA Central can look like, Success Central, and all that sort of thing. In fact, one of the most fun things I ever did was I interviewed a 104-year-old woman once, and I asked her, what's so great about being 104? She said, no peer pressure. But we have a lot of it. And in fact, as people say today, you're a ninja generation. No income, no jobs, no assets. It's a tough economy you're growing up in, a tough world. It's not going to go back to pre-2008. It's never going back. It's changing radically. You're seeing what's going on in Egypt, Italy, France, low wages, higher prices, et cetera, et cetera. The world's changing. The way you make your way in the world is by being you. The one unique God made you a unique individual who has something to give. But finding that and bringing that into a profession is really hard work. It's not easy to do. And when we talk about leadership, we say 60%, the experts do, not me, say 60% of leadership is just this. You have to know really who you are and what you want. How are you going to lead anybody else if you can't lead yourself? So this is the work to help you try to do that. And specifically, one of the biggest questions we focus on is the question of how you measure success. To do that, is Charles around here still? Charles, you up there? Great. I got a little movie for you. This is, I'll introduce it briefly. I wrote this story back in the 1990s. Turns out we did a lot of research. A story very similar to that was written in the early 60s by a German. And it turns out that it's an archetypal story in Russian Buddhist meta-literature going back thousands of years. So I just really created a new version of this. The story went viral in the 90s. It went on over 100,000 websites that's been tracked over the last 20 years, 15 years. And a year and a half ago, made a movie out of it with Free Range Studios, wonderful, wonderful group, called The Good Life Parable, about a fisherman in an MBA meeting. And you may have seen it before, you may know the story, but I'd just like you to watch it. It's used to help you reflect on how you want to measure success. It's also, by the way, on YouTube. It's also on some national television for the next year, along with some other great work by Annie Leonard, a video called The Story of Stuff. She's done some fabulous work. So take a look at The Good Life Parable and me meeting a fisherman. See how handsome I made myself in the video. It's probably my fault.
Many years ago, after I graduated from business school, I decided to take a vacation. I chose a small, quiet fishing village where I thought I'd be able to take my mind off of business, if only for a few days. Walking along the beach just before sunset, I saw a small fishing boat coming to shore. Inside the boat were lone fishermen and several beautiful yellowfin tuna. "How long did it take you to catch those fish?" I asked. "Only a couple of hours," he replied. "Why don't you stay out a bit longer and catch more?" I asked, certain that there must be a demand for more fish than the few I saw in the boat. The fisherman smiled. "I catch enough to support my family, and I live a full and busy life. I rise with the sun, fish a little, play with my daughters, have lunch with my family, and then teach children how to fish before I stroll into the village each evening, where I sip wine and play guitar with my wife and friends." "Listen," I said, "I have an MBA. I can help you vastly expand your business. If you would simply spend more time fishing, you would soon earn enough money to buy a bigger boat." "Really?" questioned the fisherman. "Absolutely. And with a bigger boat, you'd soon catch enough fish to buy several boats, then a whole fleet. At that point, you'd be big enough to sell your fish directly to a processor, cutting out the middleman and greatly increasing your profits." The fisherman raised an eyebrow. "Eventually, you could open your own cannery and control the product, the processing, and the distribution," I added. "Then what?" he asked. "Well, you then relocate your operations to the capital, and if all goes well, you'd likely find yourself in New York City in control of a rapidly expanding empire." "How long would all of this take?" he asked, clearly following my logic. "Oh, probably between 10 and 15 years, I replied. "And then what?" Well, that's the best part. You would announce an IPO and sell stock to the public. At that point, my friend, you would be very, very rich. A millionaire many times over. The fisherman paused. Really? A millionaire? Then what? What do you mean? I answered a bit surprised. I mean, what would I do if I were a millionaire? What kind of question is that? Whatever you like, of course. I imagine you'd retire. Move to a small coastal fishing village where you would rise with the sun, fish a little, play with your granddaughters, have lunch with your family, and then teach children how to fish before strolling into the village each evening where you'd sip wine and play guitar with your wife and friends. The fisherman smiled, and without saying another word, began to build a small fire. We shared a taste of the delicious fish and watched the sun go down over the ocean as the sound of guitars rose from the village nearby.
I still like watching that. By the way, the website's .com, just so you know. Enjoy that? How many of you have seen that before? Have any of you seen that? Oh, some of you have. Okay. But anyways, we use a lot of schools in the book itself, by the way. There's a process you go through in terms of, if you notice, the fisherman, the different aspects of his life with his family, his work, his life with the community, helping the kids learn to fish, et cetera, and help you go through it. Not saying one model or the other is right or wrong, but I think what it helps you do is see the assumptions we have embedded in the way we look at things that we don't even know we've made these assumptions, like the assumption of growth. Everything, growth. In fact, in the True to Yourself book, when we looked at these leaders, they no longer were looking at the sort of mantra of Jack Welch's, which was great in the 90s for General Electric, of reputation, productivity, and regulation. That great leaders help you increase your reputation, your productivity, and decrease your chance of being regulated. It was no longer reputation, it was transparency. It was no longer about productivity, it was about sustainability, and no longer about just decreasing your chance of being regulated, but proactively being responsible. So, by the way, a real funny on this, for any of you who do any type of work, your work's never interpreted the way you'd like it to be interpreted, or think what you did. Because I basically wrote this for success. It's won 4 sustainability awards at 4 film festivals. So we've gotten to go to some film festivals, and for some reason it's been picked up mostly by the sustainable business community. I think because of the fishing example, he doesn't overfish, whatever. So whatever you get out of it, it's great. But it's really meant, in a number of schools and net impact groups use this to just discuss success and what is it you want? Where are you trying to get to? In fact, all of our conversations now, in the strategy conversations we've had at Net Impact, Liz Marr, our fabulous executive director, always leads with a question, to what end? What is the purpose of this? What are we doing with this? And I think, that's the whole purpose of this, is to get you to focus on that. And hopefully, I don't know if you can see this very well, this is me back in 1984 as a professor at Harvard Business School. Finding, give, enjoying life, being your own special you. It took me 3 years to grow into being myself in the classroom. I listened to everybody else's advice. I was in my 20s, so, have people call you professor. If you make a mistake at the blackboard, don't admit it. Don't play sports. I used to play sports with my students. Well, after a while, I just gave it all up as myself. It was a lot of fun. I don't know if you can see the woman next to me. I still remember her, Pat Shue. She had gone here to school and was working actually in Detroit, and she was our section rep. She'd been undergrad at Notre Dame. But that's really what it's all about. It's about bringing joy into the world, joy into life. Call it love. And how do we do that as leaders? How do we do that in our own life? Briefly, you probably can't see this. I can send this out. This is a brochure. Mrim Butla, who was a career development at Brown and then at Indiana at the Kelley School, joined me about 1.5 years ago to bring a lot of this work that I do out to more people. We've done this at different times, but not in the last 5 years. We run online courses. They're 6-week courses. We're in the middle of pilot studies. Cindy, of course, knows well about these. We've done 2 where our 3rd one starts February 21st. For people interested, love to hear from you. Again, this is something we're trying to develop with individual career development departments as well. Part of it is what I just said to you. Part of it is the work part of getting you in shape where you feel really comfortable about who you are and what you want. Okay? Even though that's evolving, the values are pretty stable. The second part is trying to help you with the landscape of opportunities out there. The world's changed. It's not just simply for-profits and non-profits. And by the way, this slide was done by Marim. She did this. which we used at the Net Impact Conference. I think is wonderful. There's a lot of hybrids now. There's a lot of different options. I've mentioned twice since I've been here. The B Corps, these B foundations, you might have heard of B corporations, for-benefit corporations, LC3s and the like. They've now been legislated in 5 states so far with the B Corp. Hopefully it'll be 30 or 40 states in another couple of years. These are corporate forms that allow you to get tax advantages for certain types of socially responsible and sustainable behaviors. Several thousand firms have filled out this very extensive survey. Only about 1,000 or so far have become B Corps. There's probably 5,000 firms out there that need you to help them become a B Corp. So there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of opportunities, because it's great for you to figure all this out, but if we then can't help you go out and bring it into the world in a sustainable life for you, then what's it worth? So we're trying and working with career development offices to connect you as well in the marketplace. Here are the sort of 5 key learnings from all of this work, and then we'll get to Q&A. Mark and I'll get to Q&A. Just 5 things to remember, if you like. In the beginning, the first question you ask in anything you do is absolutely critical. If your first question is something like, what does the market need? What skills do I have? Therefore, what should I do? That will take you one place. If your first question is, what is it that really makes me come alive? What is it that gets me out of bed in the morning? Or as one of my friends who used to be at the Harvard Kennedy School, Michael Goldstein, used to say, I have our students ask 3 questions. What's the social challenge out there? You want to see that social challenge met, an injustice, something that bothers you. Secondly, what needs to be done. Thirdly, what can you do to make a difference in that? So how you begin thinking about that, and by the way, my friends who have founded corporations, the same thing, they spend an inordinate amount of time early on, 6 months or more, just getting the initial stages set up, because that foundation is so important for where you go. Okay? So what are the questions you ask yourself in the beginning? In the More Than Money book, we try to help you through a set of questions, I think about 64 of them, in an order that we think makes sense. It's one of them. Secondly, success is personal. We all have our own definitions. They can change over time. For me, my definition is really simple. It's that every day I get a chance to act on my values. And that varies. It varies what those values are. A lot of my career was staying home with my youngest daughter because my wife and her are like killing each other. So my biggest job was to make sure we helped raise Nicolette. Other times it's being out and trying to be the privilege of being at schools like this and hopefully inspiring a little bit and hopefully opening up some doors and opportunities and some support, a community to help you navigate a career of social impact. And that's the third part we learned early on in Net Impact. Support is essential. Most of us who've gone our own path haven't gotten a whole lot of support. That's part of the deal. It's just part of what happens. We have to all deal with 2 things in our careers. Number one is we have to come to terms with money. We are spiritual beings, but we're in material form. And that material form is important. Money doesn't talk, it swears. It's an important part of life. You've got to deal with how much is enough. What do you need? What do you think you need financially? If you think you need a lot more, that's going to limit your opportunities. If you think you need a lot less, that's going to free you up. It's all really up to do. We've asked about 7,000 MBAs at one point. I think it was about 5 years ago. That question, second-year MBAs, whether they're individuals or have partners, what do they need to get by relatively comfortably. We factored out what part of the country or part of the world they're going to be living in. We actually just did for the US, I'm sorry. Just what part of the country that they'd be living in to try to standardize it. The numbers we got range from about $25,000, $30,000 to about $500,000. So if you think you need to make $500,000 to get by, that's going to be a different way of dealing with your career in life than if you think you need 25 or 30. Okay? That's one thing. The second thing to come to terms with is perceptions, particularly parental perceptions. They can be real, they can be imagined, they can be negative, they can be positive. This is a big issue. It's even a bigger issue outside the US. A big issue in parts of Africa where there's a tremendously deep connection to your ancestors and to doing what they did. And with some of my friends who've sort of broken away from that, like one who's a businessman, his whole family from Uganda are all doctors, but he does a lot of work with Kellogg Foundation Fellows, a lot of work helping young people get involved in business in the southern part of Africa and Uganda. So that's the way he helps and heals through that. But it's very, very difficult. I remember interviewing Lillian Vernon years ago, who had a big business, Lillian Vernon catalog. And Miss Vernon, the first 45 minutes of our hour interview, all she talked about was whether her mother from the Deep South would really be happy with what she was doing. Her mother had been dead for 15 years. So parental perceptions play a big influence, as can peer perceptions, and we have to decide how we want to deal with that. But support is essential, and that's one of the reasons we develop a community like Knit Impact, where we all have different minds but share the same heart of service to others. The fourth is, this is an iterative process. There's a wonderful book by Hermione Ibarra, who's a professor at INSEAD, called Working Identity, that tracks 38 MBAs and looks at their careers. And like most of us, we say that, it's never like a straight line. Your career is always under construction. It's all over the place. It's really hard. We used to put up resumes of some very successful people, and you would just never believe they ended up here when they started here. It's very much trying to get involved in what you care about. Then you meet other people who care about that, doing things with honesty and integrity. And as I like to say, if you do it, you'll find your next job along the way. My biggest failure, and I've had many business failures, where a lot of people lost a lot of money, the vast majority of them invested in our next company. I was honest about it. Everybody knew what was going on. Some things happened we couldn't control. I lost almost all my money as well, and they came along on the next ride as well. So, don't be afraid of quote unquote failure, as long as you're honest, and I'm sure you are, in high integrity. That's really what it's about. And it's an iterative process. Okay? It's not your first job out, it might be your 14th. I don't know what it is, but it takes time, and it continues. Finally, be awake. Particularly as MBAs, we're so like this. We're very risk averse, and we're like this. I used to say that, when you go to business school, it's like going to a restaurant with 3 things on the menu. It's just like all of a sudden this happens. Being awake is about seeing what happens on the sidelines. Almost every opportunity that has worked out for most of us has never come from here. It's come from here. It's come from a lot of us from our nonprofit work. I've been in for-profits. I start doing some volunteer work. I start writing for a group. I end up developing myself as a writer. Comes from things. So be open to all the angels you have around you and to the blessings that are there for you if you're open to them, and free and liberated enough to take a few chances in life and not necessarily listen to every one of what we call the VOJs. Those are those peer pressure voices of judgment around you. Okay, so just wrapping up, we'll move into questions. Okay, now, I think the big message of this last book gotten from the students is, I love this, we call these inversions, that this is really about finding yourself by losing yourself in something bigger than yourself. I think that's really the heart of Ubuntu. I think that's the heart of why people like myself, I love to go to church and the temple. I'm very involved in religion, both Christianity for a number of years and Judaism. Have had the pleasure of doing interfaith tours for President Bush, who was back then after 9/11. And I've been and one of the reasons I do is because when I'm involved in spiritual activities, I forget about myself. I'm not so focused on paying the mortgage. Maybe I should be, right? And other things. And it's sometimes the happiest that I ever am. And what's funny is, again, out of that, how a lot of these other things eventually take care of yourself. As mentioned earlier on, that I do a lot of Bible teaching and Hebrew teaching, etc. Well, a lot of that has developed over the last 15 years into a small part of an income-producing career. I sort of have a portfolio of how I make a living. So these things develop over time. So I think that for all of us to just think about what is that bigger self you want to walk into, what is that bigger dream, that bigger story that you want to be part of, is a wonderful way of launching a career in leadership for the greater good. Hey, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Your time.
Do you want to move over here, or do you want to sit there?
Put a last quote on there for you. Yeah.
Okay.
This is also one of my favorite quotes from Abraham Lincoln. This is, by the way, after they're in the middle of the Civil War, and everybody was saying that we have to pray that God's on our side in this war so we can win the war. And he said, pray not that God's on our side. Pray in what we do that we're on God's side. Pretty nice.
Please help yourselves to the microphones here. While people are getting courage to ask questions, I'll ask a few, and hopefully I'll set an example and other people will come up. But please just step up and we'll recognize you. I've always been intrigued with this concept of failure and the role it plays in our life. And because we're a society that really elevates people who have been successes, talking about failure and the importance of failure in business is one of those topics, because I've spoke on it before, that not a lot of people want to hear about. It's very scary. So how do you feel that we should create tolerance for failure, not only in our society, but also within ourselves?
Yeah. I think the first thing, Mark, the first thing is to separate yourself from the failure, meaning most of us have been entrepreneurs. I think I speak for, there's about 400 of us in Social Net Venture Network in the US. And we would probably say that our successful ventures, 90% of it was luck. Timing, with just the right time. Even on books, I've talked to friends of mine. I have one very big selling book and then 6 others that have sold okay. Why did that one sell so well? So first of all, it's almost personally dissociating your control with whether something is successful or quote unquote a market failure. That you have a certain amount, but maybe not as much as you think. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, I think the culture today, though, and maybe you disagree with that, is at least more accepting of failure, particularly entrepreneurial failure, than it was maybe 30, 40 years ago. Not so sure if that's true, but I have a feeling that today, particularly like I said, I've had 5 of my ventures go down the tubes and 2 lost in the tens of millions of dollars. I mean, pretty serious money for a non-dot-com company. So, I mean, those are pretty hard to take, but on the other hand, I developed some of my deepest friendships through those. Those were stepping stones to other things. So I think a lot of the whole failure thing comes back to this VOJ stuff. I mean, sure, we'd love to change the media. We know that. We know what the media puts on. We see the 3 dot-coms that work, not the 3,000 that didn't, right? So we know that. We can't control that. You can only control yourself. That's all you can do. I'll never forget what Mother Teresa once said, that she said that, she said, worrying about what other people think is a sign of arrogance. Be humble and serve God. That's all you have to worry about. So I think a lot of it has to do with what we can control. I can't control what the media says about failure. In our group, when we get together, I know I was with Gary Hirschberg the other day, to Stonyfield, other friends, 90% of what we talk about are things that didn't work. So I think particularly these days among our community and stuff, I mean, all of us are entrepreneurs. We've all failed. The old expression is if you do one company, it works, you're lucky, and if you do 20 and 2 work, you're really good. I mean, so it's part of it. So I think it's listening to your own voice. It's just being a little bit less sensitive to what other people necessarily have to say. And again, back to the parental thing, et cetera, none of you, I would argue, are going to be able to carve out your own path without having voices, that aren't always supportive of you. And very few companies ever do anything special where when you start them, people are quote, supporting you. I mean, I know when I started at Impact, it was considered a failure. I mean, I was considered a loser, both from my Harvard Business School friends and even from our social responsible friends. Social responsible friends said, why are you working with MBAs? They are blood-sucking, money-sucking people. That's all they care about. That's what they said in the 80s. Think about the 1980s, those of you mostly read about them. That sort of was the deal. And I said, no, they're not. They're like everybody else. The question is what the container is, what we teach, what opportunities we set up. They want to do noble things too. So I think that's another way of, you have to have your own way of looking at things and be a little careful about listening to other voices.
Well, some will argue that when you're talking about kind of this revolutionary thinking you're talking about not being afraid of failure and going out there and being who you are and bringing that to the table, some would argue that it's easier to do that in your own company that you create than it would be to go to a company that already exists and trying to find that culture that would be accepting of that. And what has your experience been with that?
We get fired a lot. We get fired. I'm serious. I mean, I think for a lot of us, first of all, it's hard to work in a different environment. You're so used to being on your own, if that's it. But the other part of it is that, and I got this from Akers when he was running IBM. He came to Yale with me one day, and he spoke to the students. And John said, the time to bring these values to work is at the beginning. Okay, and today especially, that's all that's going to differentiate you. I'm going to outsource you, replace you with a computer. Unless you bring what's different about you, what's special, what you're passionate about, something that connects to your childhood, to who you want to be, who you want to become in this world. Unless you bring that to your work, you're not going to succeed in today's world probably at the levels you want to succeed at. That's what's going to make you different. That's what's going to make you be willing to look under every stone and traverse every challenge that you meet to try to make something work. So that's what we're looking for. What it means is when you go out and look for a job, as Mark's saying, less people are going to be interested in you. You may not fit that culture. So instead of 5 job interviews, you may be 20. Or I like to say students really try to focus on just a few that you think would really work. It will take longer. It will take you longer to build your career probably as well. But when you build it and you do it, you'll be building your career in something that really has a strong foundation, is sustainable, and something that allows you to spread joy. So I'm not saying it's easier, just as Mark's saying, it's probably harder, but it's A, a way of creating value, and B, in the long term, it creates a sustainable life for yourself.
Okay, I'm running out of questions here, so somebody's got to come up and start asking some. So I was interested when you said, when you're talking about Ubuntu. And I thought to myself, looking back on writers like Emerson who wrote about self-reliance and looking at our Constitution and, you know, our respective people who are individuals, how do we reconcile our identity being created through individualism with our identity actually being Ubuntu?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I mean, you know, especially the Wild West. It's even a Republican Democrat coming, I guess. But I'm not getting into blue states and red states. But it's a really great question because you're right. It's there's a wonderful book that Damani Mandela wrote with Rabbi Warren Goldstein, who's the first South African-born chief rabbi of South Africa. It's called African Soul Talk, and it looks at the similarities between Ubuntu and biblical Judaism, which tends to be a more communal. And it really is very different for those of us who are born in the United States. This country is absolutely about individualism, individual rights, etc. And I would argue that that has severe limitations. For example, in an Ubuntu culture, to say you are self-reliant is a terrible thing to say. To say that, oh, I see, when you came into the world, you needed other people to help you. When you leave the world, you need other people to help you. Well, in between, don't you sort of need other people to help you? So it's interesting, that culture, to say I'm self-reliant, which we so much admire here, is, we call it a chandra. It's a sin, almost a sin. But secondly, I think things are changing. I mentioned earlier, there's an article, I think, which is a bellwether article in the business field. That's the cover story of Harvard Business Review, this February's edition, by Mike Porter and Mark Kramer. Michael I know very well. I don't know if you know him in competitive strategy, but I work with Michael daily for 4 or 5 years at Harvard, and I know him very well. Michael has been the supporter of the individualism model. Most of what you study in competitive strategy either comes out of him or Jag Sheff, some others, but it's all based on, you know, you getting more and everybody else getting less, the individual. And this article is all about shared value. It's about, if we're really going to navigate this world, it's going to be about sharing and collaboration, not as much about the individual. What's nice about Ubuntu, and again, I am not an Ubuntu expert, but have really tried to study it and been over there a lot the last 5 years, is it's a bit of a combination. It's not like only the community, because remember, the community's job is to help you find your gifts. So to help you be a better individual. But just like any spiritual teaching, it deeply recognizes the importance of that fact that we're all connected. So again, I don't know if it overthrows individualism, but it certainly shift gears. And you could argue that it is certainly a bit of a, I don't want to say counterpoint, but certainly a very different philosophy than the self-reliant individualism. Any one of us who've ever built a company, done anything, no matter what the press says, good or bad, have never done it as an individual. Okay. No success comes from one person. It just doesn't happen.
So Cindy's
That's a great question, by the way. I love that. Oh.
Cindy's going to do the Phil Donahue thing.
No,
so it was great.
Hey, Oprah's out now, so Cindy, you know, there's an opening. Take over for Oprah.
Good.
Hi, my name is Ali. I'm a second-year MBA student here, originally from Pakistan. And I'm sure that many other people are in a similar sort of quandary. I mean, I'm very interested in social enterprise, been a net impact member for a number of years now. And I'm actually I don't know what kind of time frame, I'm interested in moving back to my country and trying to do something in social enterprise around education. I guess the thing that I'm trying to ask for your opinion on is, how do you balance the risks? I mean, you've talked about that there's a lot of risk going into starting up your own company and multiple failures. At this point in my career with a young family, what kind of advice do you have about balancing the risks?
Sure, thanks for the question.
Good. Before you answer that, can you hear him back there? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just summarizing, I think it's balancing the risk of maybe wanting to go back, in this case, to Pakistan, your own country, start something up, but you got a young family, and you know, how do you balance the risk of doing that and with the family versus doing things that maybe aren't exactly what you want to do now, but maybe trying to do it later or whatever. One of the most powerful, I think, ideas that come out of More Than Money. And by the way, I wish I were Adam or Eve, because then I would not have to worry about someone saying something before I did. So I don't want you to think that any of my ideas are original with me. I'm sure these are in lots of other places. We just are all collectors of wisdom that's already out there. In fact, the expression goes that when you give a quote, you know, you say, well, the first time you say, well, as you know, Mother Teresa said. The second time you say, well, as someone famous said. And the third time you say, well, as I like to say. You know, we like to say plagiarism is stealing from one person, but when you steal from lots of people, it's research. Okay.
That's right.
So given that, there's something, and I think it's been written about, that I call a deferred life plan. And it came back to a comment Warren Buffett made a number of years ago to our students at our school, and I'm sure he's made lots of other places, where a student said, you know, I'd really like to go and do this thing, and it's what I'm passionate about, and in his case, too, is also going back to another country, but I think I should first make some money for about 10 years, you know, and put some money away and take care of my loans, and then I should go and do what I really, really want to do. What do you think about that, Mr. Buffett? Mr. Buffett goes, well, Sonny, I don't know, to me it sounds like you're saving up sex for old age. And the point of that, and of course he can say that, right? I mean, the point of it being that you got to be very careful about these deferred life plans. Life goes a lot of crazy ways. I don't know if I mentioned it today or this morning, Seth Coleman, our good friend and Net Impact poster person. Seth was at Calvert Fund with a great job. Seth is really, he's one of the very rare, not just young people of any age, who really has all the qualities of being a great leader. From the technical skills to the people skills, he's a very, very unusual mix in a very deep background, and goes back to his parents and everything. They live 10 minutes from me, so I've known him since he was a kid. And he's in his mid-40s now. And Seth had a great job, had 3 young kids, the youngest of which had almost just died right after childbirth. And that's when he launched his company. I remember being on the phone with him, and you know, he's working with his old professor at Yale on this thing called Honest Tea, and it's really risky, and we're talking about it, and you know, so first of all, the point of it, and that takes a lot of guts, and I'm not saying that's immoral, but the point is, there's never the perfect time. I mean, it just doesn't happen. You know, it's like first you have 50,000 loans, then you have a mortgage on a house, then you have kids going, you know, it never is the perfect time. And so that I think that, and the second thing is, and I know I've been through this with my wife before, you know, the people who love you, even your parents, some of us struggle with our parents, they want you to be happy, be a good person, and spread joy. And if you communicate to them the things that you really care about, they'll take the risk with you. It won't be one person taking the risk. It'll be the whole family in there. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, hopefully you'll meet your next people along the way. But you will then get into a community of people who care about what you care about so that it leads to your next job. That's why these early questions and early movements can be important. If you go in the other direction, you're never going to meet those people and get to know them. See what I'm saying? So I think that's why it's important. We say it's important what watering hole you hang out at. You know, pick your taverns, because those are the people that are going to impact, you know, what you do. That's also why if you are trying to make changes in your career, you can't go back to your friends. You got to find new friends. Your old friends are going to take you back to where you were. So it's important in terms of, we find our students who are really the most happy. These are MBAs now. This was actually put together by Sarah, can't remember her last name, one of our New York net impactors, been very successful. Sarah put them together. Our MBAs, when you look at what are the criteria for what makes them happy, number one now has become where they're living. A lot have children are moving back where their families were. We've had people move for last year from DC 2 years ago to Denver, Colorado. Took a big down, you know, the job market wasn't as good, but they had family, and over time sort of rebuild that part. So I think where you decide to work, both in terms of location, and then secondly is where you work, the community of people you work with, that's critically important to your boss, that stuff. But where you live, those things are all extremely important, more than I think most of us realize, particularly when you have a family.
We got a question up here.
If I speak loud, can I do it from here?
Are we recording this?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
recording thing, not a personal attack on your voice.
Question has to do with the relationship between values and success. Some of your businesses succeeded, some failed. Were the values a driver of success in the ones that succeeded, or were they just a nice way to go?
Yeah, great. Yeah. The quickie on this, I do a lot of entrepreneurial classes, and I think, again, Adam and Eve story, I think a lot of what I have to say comes from others too. I think we just agree. The success of the businesses that have succeeded have all been because of people. It's been the Jim Collins comment of getting the right people on the bus. My companies with the best products, the best fits, et cetera, are the ones that have not done as well. It's been the ones where we've really struggled to find out what we really should be doing around a set of values with the right people who had those values. In terms of the values comment, that's cut both ways. I lost one of my companies based on values. In fact, 2 or 3, we've had a number of situations where values came into conflict with financial success. I had one company that I started up with a dear friend and with help from Ben Cohen from Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, which was a pet product company. We did rainforest dog biscuits, a whole bunch of things. It was a blast, by the way. Most fun business I ever did. Did extremely well financially, but then to get to the next level and deal with Hilton hotel chains and a whole bunch of national purchasers, we were going to have to move everything to central part of the United States. And one of our fundamental values of the company was to increase employment in Vermont. I mean, that was one of the reasons we started the company. Vermont's a great place to live, but there was just not, in a lot of IBM, a lot of companies had pulled out, so we started the company. One of our main values was to employ, well, how do we employ people in Vermont by moving, to the Midwest? So we decided not to move to the Midwest. Stay in Vermont. It kept us small, and eventually we sold the company. So in a way, I think we could have had much more financial success if we had moved it, but in that case, the values overrode that. In another case I had a company where we switched the values a bit. The values was we had a program using interactive technology to bring issues of human rights, et cetera, through very creative programming into high schools and wanted companies to fund that. So the values was really about helping high school kids get educated about social concerns. That's what we were trying to do. The long and short is that really never worked. And what worked was using that technology to help large corporations teach mid and low-level employees about company values as a low-cost training mechanism. We financially did very well, sold the company off to Apple. Heart wasn't there. So maybe that gives you the two. So they don't always work together. I think the real key, which these were early years of doing this that we've learned from others, is you really have to build the values into the value proposition deeply. Honest Tea will be owned by Coca-Cola, I guess 90% or 95% this week or next week. Long talks with Seth about this. The product itself, I think, is pretty secure. He has built the values in the product. We'll see what happens. So far, it's been wonderful. And so far for Gary Hirschberg with Stonyfield, it's also been wonderful from what I hear from Group Denon as well. But the culture of the company, he has an incredible culture. I mean, everybody's got bicycles, everything's it's just a great place to go. I don't know. Is that embedded enough? So again, I don't want to make it seem really simple that values always lead to value in the marketplace. There's often conflicts. And I just gave you 2 examples in my case of them going different ways.
I'm from like a third world country. But when I first came here, I could tell how different it was because Peru, we are like very collective, like we care about people. Like it's like the opposite of individualism. So when I came, I liked it, like how life was, better, probably better. But I was shocked how sometimes people were so cold at high school, especially because I was struggling with the language, and I kind of wanted to look for help, but people were like, "Oh, we don't care if you don't speak English. Like, if you don't understand what I'm saying, I'll speak faster, if just so that you understand." I'm like, "Okay, this is not." It was kind of hard. So my question is, do you think the United States would be a better country if they become more collectivism? That's my question.
I get your question. Yeah, money's so complicated. Everybody thinks, Again, I wish all of you could have a period of life when you've had a lot of money, so you can see that it's not really all that you think it is. And of course, the issue is, do you control the money? Does it control you? Money's a freedom. You can do a lot of great things with it, but it changes most people or even countries. It's like, my dad grew up on Jones Avenue in Dorchester, which is a poor part of the Boston area where, one side were all the Jews and the other side were all the Irish, by the way, and they all fought together and got along together. They were all immigrants. They were all first generation over in this country. If somebody wasn't doing well, there was more meat left at the door. Everybody took care of each other, And then World War II came and people dispersed and out to the suburbs and that community was gone. So there's something that has to do with just financial situation. For example, as you get wealthy, you don't have to go next door to borrow something from your neighbor. Everybody has everything on their own. And then the walls start going up, and the fences start going up. And I know I live on a very wealthy street, to be blunt with you. Ourselves and our Greek neighbors are from Greece, very Greek, speak some English, but anyways, we're the only, of the 20 houses in our row, we're the only ones that share a playground setup. The only one. So there is something about money that can create quite a bit of distance between people, and something about when you're more in need that can create tremendous connectivity. Like you look at some of the more challenged communities in parts of Alaska and northern part of Canada, Inuits, et cetera, where they have a party every year where everybody brings whatever they have collected before the winter there, and everybody takes something from somebody else. And the richest person, of course, is the one who has the most to give away. And this is the Ubuntu concern too. The concern with Ubuntu is Ubuntu can work very well in, let's say, impoverished or maybe up to middle class communities. But as you start industrializing, how well will that ethic work? How well will, and let me use the collectivity as an example politically. One of the problems or challenges of Ubuntu, or what you're saying, is the whole decision-making process changes. Like all of my friends, we started running companies and said, we want to do this democratically, collectively. Try it. It's really hard. In South Africa, when Mbeki or whatever the president has to do a decision, the amount of time that has to go in before you even get started is enormous. The good news is, if you believe in a collective approach and do it, is once you then make a decision, implementation is very rapid. There's already buy-in. That's a very different process than a lot of us who want to move quicker at the beginning, and then we spend time trying to. So there's even political, it's not just a social issue of collectivity. It creates different decision-making processes. One of the most incredible companies in the world for collectivity is called Axis, A-X-I-Z. It makes computer infrastructure about an hour outside of Johannesburg, about a $2 billion company where every single person in that company is a decision maker and a stockholder. And they all have to learn it. None of them ever worked in a corporation before. They all come from the townships. It's an amazing company. By the way, at home office is 450 people. Before you get hired, you're interviewed by 450 people. That's the process.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so you can see how cumbersome it is on one end when you get promoted. You don't get promoted at the firm, you get promoted at home. Yeah, I mean, these are all there. So I think there's a lot, but I think one, money can make collectivity much more complicated. Two, money in general changes people. I hope the people in the room, if you do get wealthy, it won't change you. It'll give you the opportunity to serve even more. But for a lot of people, it changes them. And three, it also can create a lot of fear. If you think because you have a lot of money, you feel secure, for a lot of people, it works the other way around. So I think those are the challenges when you become a more developed country and you become wealthier. Again, they can all be opportunities too, but I think those are some of the challenges.
How are we doing on time? Are we still good?
Yeah, if you have more questions, sure.
Any more questions?
2:40.
Okay. All right.
We're good?
Thank you all. We're going
We'll
to
do a book signing if you like.
yeah, we're going to convene out in the lobby, and if you want a book, they're out there, and you can get it signed. And I'd just like to thank Dr. Albion for being with us today.
Thank you.